Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Jen, and I'm joined by Carlin and Dave. Together, we'll be taking you through this session on bringing entrepreneurship to life in the classroom. Whether you teach entrepreneurship explicitly, embed it into business or economics, or are simply looking for better ways to engage students, this session is designed to give you ideas you can actually use. Here's what we've got planned. We'll start with a short warm-up activity, the kind you could use straight away in your class. Then Dave will unpack why an entrepreneurial mindset, together with creativity and collaboration, why that matters, especially for young people. After that, we'll explore different types of classroom-ready resources and how they can be used for different purposes, before we finish with next steps and a Q&A. Before we dive in, just a quick introduction to the three of us as your presenters today. I started in private industry, working in research and development and creating new products, working for mid-sized industrial-based firms before taking my business experience to teaching at the university level. My teaching philosophy has always been about helping students apply theory in meaningful, relatable ways. That often meant bringing industry voices into the classroom, which is how I met Dave. After more than 2 decades working with entrepreneurs and accelerator programs, Dave noticed something important. People wanted to start businesses, but they didn't always know how to think like entrepreneurs. So he created a business, Ripyl, to help build that mindset, but earlier, by supporting teachers in class with engaging real-world activities. And Carlin is our lead teacher. She brings over 20 years of secondary teaching across South Africa, the UK, and New Zealand. I'll pass to Carlin now to share her classroom experience and how finding resources like the ones we'll explore today changed the dynamic for her students.
Thanks, Jen. I want to start by saying I've been exactly where you are. I was teaching at a time when classrooms started to feel very different. Students were more connected to technology, used to constant stimulation, and honestly, it sometimes felt like they needed to be entertained just to stay engaged. I remember thinking, I know this content matters, but how do I get them to care? Traditional methods didn't always land the way they used to. Even when I had well-planned lessons, it felt like a struggle to hold students' attention or to get them to see the relevance. That's when I realized the issue wasn't the students. It was the way the learning was structured. When students are used to interacting, creating, and making decisions in their everyday lives, passive learning just doesn't work anymore. They need ownership. They need to do something with the ideas.
As Carlin keeps telling her story, we would love to hear yours too. In the chat, let us know where you're joining from, what you teach, and your biggest challenge right now. We'll keep an eye on the chat, but back over to you, Carlin.
The shift for me came when I started using resources where students took the lead, where they weren't just learning about business, but actually thinking like entrepreneurs. Instead of explaining concepts and hoping students would apply them later, the learning flipped. Students were solving problems they recognized, building ideas they cared about, and making decisions that felt real. That's why I'm so passionate about the types of resources we're exploring today. They designed by teachers for teachers with real classrooms in mind. I saw how the resources in action created so much impact for students that I wanted to be part of a team building them and making them available for other teachers.
Now, we're going to use the word resources quite a bit, and I just want to highlight what we mean by that. When we talk about resources, these are supporting materials for teachers to use in the class. They include presentation slides, worksheets, and teacher notes, but essentially it's a pack of materials that lets a teacher run an activity in their classroom.
All right, let's imagine you in your classroom. It's the last class on a Friday. You've got 15 minutes to go. Students are distracted or checked out. This is where something like this activity, One where students can tap into their creativity while still keeping a focus on entrepreneurship can make a huge difference. We're actually going to pause for a minute and let you do the activity, just like you would get your students to do in class. For the $0 startup activity, you need to come up with a new business idea. So you're thinking of a way to create value using only what you already have, your skills, your creativity, or resources. You aren't allowed to spend any money. You need to think about what product or service you could offer, how it creates value, and why your startup business idea is unique or different. In class, we'd pace students up, but for today, I'm going to give you 60 seconds to see how you go on your own. To help get the creativity flowing, a few examples we've recently heard are a tax filing service, social media design service, or carry-on only packing service. So now you've got 60 seconds to come up with your own idea and let us know in the chat when you've got it.
And a reminder, and one you could maybe use in class, is that there is no right answer here. So the crazier, the better. Okay, 30 more seconds. All right, let's share a few ideas. We could either unmute or just pop them in the chat.
What you've just done there, that is a lesson starter. This slide here is how you can end the activity in your class and prompt deeper discussion about starting a business, what is required, and how personal experiences or passion might help. Lesson starters are great because they are short, low prep, and focused on creating, deciding, or solving something. When students do these activities, it doesn't feel like work to them, even though they are thinking deeply and applying key concepts. The more I was using activities like the one we just did, the more it started clicking for me. It wasn't about hammering home the word entrepreneurship. It was about creating the conditions for students to think differently, to feel confident sharing ideas, and to practice solving problems in ways that felt real. It's about helping develop how students think. This brings us to what we mean by an entrepreneurial mindset. It's not just a subject, it's a way of thinking that shows up across the classroom. When students engage in activities like the ones we're exploring today, they're building the skills tied to the future of work. I'm going to hand over to Dave now, who will unpack why developing an entrepreneurial mindset is so important and why it goes far beyond business classrooms.
Actually, before we pass to Dave, I've put in the chat a couple of questions. Give us a quick yes or no. Do you see these skills becoming more important for your students over the next 5 years? Or are there other skills you think help feed into developing the entrepreneurial mindset? But now, as we get ready to hear from Dave, if you have any thoughts on the question we've got showing there on the screen, please share those in the chat. But Dave, now over to you. Why is developing an entrepreneurial mindset important, especially in young people?
Well, thanks, Carl and Jen. I could probably talk about this for days on end, but I'll try and keep it a little bit to time. So it's a great question, and I think a lot of times people forget that when we talk about entrepreneurship, we get into this box around it's always about building a business or going into commerce or being an accountant or doing something in the corporate world. But an entrepreneurial mindset is, it's so much more than that. I think few points quickly. One is when we think of our young people, we all have kids, grandkids, friends that have kids. The world they're entering now is completely different than what I was entering 40 years ago. When I was, coming through school, there was a really linear path, right? You go to elementary school in the US, then you go to junior high, high school, then you go to university and you get a job. Um, but nowadays it's so different, right? There's more change, more uncertainty. Students change jobs, even industries, multiple times now, where, back in the day it was 5 or 6 times a guy like me would change my career. Now it's, anywhere between 15 and 20. And so what's important around an entrepreneurial mindset is they need ways of thinking. They just don't need content knowledge. Nowadays it's so special because you can jump online as long as you go to validated, reputable sources and actually learn what you could learn in school or what they're teaching you in school. You could actually, take the stuff online and make your brain that much bigger. The other thing is, I talk about agency. Entrepreneurial mindset's not. It's really about this agency. It's rather than seeing problems as problems and being negative and this isn't going to work. It's actually identifying that problem and going, wow, there's an opportunity there that I can either help my friends, I could put a little business model around it. That whole belief system of I can do something about this. And in the classroom, it moves from passive learning to active ownership. So if you think about stuff that goes on in teaching, when we're standing up in front of kids and students, it's, really rather than lecturing them and, pushing all this stuff out of a textbook, it's giving them project-based learning where they can own it, they can understand it, they can fail fast, and they keep going. Because when they do that, the entrepreneurial mindset unlocks. You get problem solving, you get creativity, you get teams working together. So there's massive communication, huge collaboration. One thing too is decision making. So I've got 4 daughters of my own, and if I could get one of them to actually make a decision on something quickly, I would probably give them $100. But nowadays, these kids need to understand that it's okay if you make a decision, even if you're uncertain about what that decision is. Make the decision, move on, because if it's not the right decision, you can quickly change, iterate, and bring everyone alongside you and keep going. So I like to think of entrepreneurship really as it's a life skill. It's not really a career choice. It's not about building a business. And the last point I will say on this is you have to really understand that our young people are already thinking like entrepreneurs. They just don't do it in school because I think the school framework really strips that away. I mean, think about their phones. They create content. They're using their phones to do videos, mash up videos, put music underneath the videos. That stuff used to take us on, Adobe Suite hours and hours and hours. And now our kids are creating all that stuff, laying all the tracks down. And within 30 seconds, you've got a pretty cool little digital file. They're solving problems socially and digitally. They experiment all the time, right? I don't like the sound on that video, or I don't like what I look like on that. So they're testing it, they're iterating it, they're trying it again. And so, all of that builds the confidence to do things, the confidence to fail fast. They learn confidence not by being told by others. They learn confidence by actually learning it themselves. So, like I said, I could keep going on, but I'll stop but happy to take questions in the chat as we move through.
Thanks, Dave. And I think some of those things that you mentioned there too about that agency and ownership, we saw that coming up earlier in terms of those challenges in the classroom about getting student buy-in and actually having students wanting to participate. So shifting the focus from just, that knowledge, that content, as Carlin said earlier, it's not just about hammering home the word entrepreneurship, but actually giving them that space to be building that mindset. And that does bring us to the second question. How can then projects and challenges and supplementary activities actually help support that development in the classroom?
Yeah, well, exactly. In New Zealand, when we talk about entrepreneurship in school and we're talking, high school, Albert Einstein pops to the top. And even though he was a great entrepreneur and a great problem solver, surely we can talk about modern day entrepreneurs, people that have actually shifted the dial while I was alive and while, our students are alive. And so when you start to think about entrepreneurship, think about learning, think about ways to, get students really actively involved, it's all around, this project-based theory. And it's nothing new. It's not like we're recreating the wheel. It's just understanding that kids really consume this stuff when they start to learn about the concepts, not just the theory. So you can tell them something out of a textbook, but then if they go and actually do it in a group together, they're learning it by doing it. And then they use this to make the decisions, right? We go back to the decision making. It's uncertain. It doesn't matter. I've learned about the concept. I'm going to make a quick decision. And then once they do that, learning really sticks. And we've seen that in classrooms across, Australia, New Zealand, and the US. I also think too, when we think about project challenges, supplementary activities in the classroom, they're creating content and context, which is everything. These abstract ideas that they riffed on become actually meaningful when that idea actually is attached to a specific problem, and then that problem becomes an opportunity, and then the students are starting to understand that, oh, that issue isn't an issue because I think I've got a way to fix it. And then we get into all the soft skills that we talk about that entrepreneurship is so brilliant at, right? Empathy, decision making, problem solving. And then once they start to get into it really deeply in a commerce class or a high school business class, they start learning about pricing. They understand the value of time. They start to understand costs. A taco just isn't, $6 at Taco Bell because Taco Bell's the cheapest. It's $6 because of all this extra stuff that's added to that one taco, marketing, commercials, if they're going to put an ad in the Super Bowl. And then it goes away from a student actually at the end of your class looking at you going, why on earth are we learning this, to, man, this is awesome because it's sticking. And then you see in classrooms, following that, those concepts have actually landed in the student's brain because, they're dealing with stuff that they are interested in. And this naturally builds all those behaviors, right? And teamwork, collaboration is huge. There's not one single business in the world that's a one-man band. And if you can find one, please let me know, because if you think a single entrepreneur doesn't have an accountant, doesn't have, a lot of these systems behind them, you're crazy. They also learn negotiation, compromise. Gosh, I have to give this up. I can't attend my football training, or I can't go to baseball practice because actually I've got my group work and I'm really interested in building out what this potential project looks like for class. Creativity, experimentation, reflection, iteration, all that stuff. It's the flywheel approach, right? And the last point I'll say is, by doing all this in a classroom around a project or activity, it really lowers the fear of getting things wrong. Far too often kids are, consistently smacked saying, nah, you're wrong. That's wrong. Your opinion doesn't matter. Entrepreneurship with creativity, problem solving, there's no single right answer. The first thing we do is we get kids just to brainstorm, go crazy, blue sky think, the crazier, the better. Cause usually the crazy stuff is the stuff that the kids go, oh, actually we could probably fix that. And then they test ideas, they get feedback, they improve the whole cycle, the flywheel, because that actually mirrors not just entrepreneurial thinking in the real world, but it mirrors life. The more times you can go through a process of doing things, the quicker and faster everything becomes. And, I reckon we could teach a lot of life skills, with the exception of blowing up a beaker in chemistry class in a business model. So I'll stop at that.
Thanks, Dave. And I know actually you had talked in there about lowering that barrier and giving students the opportunity to practice in the classroom, those skills that they're going to need in the future. And I don't know, Carlin, if you want to jump in or not, but I know that you had seen this firsthand when Dave actually first started coming into your classroom, sort of those activities, especially the design thinking challenges, which we'll talk about in a bit, how that actually shifted the energy. Is there anything you want to say now, or when we get to that a little bit?
Absolutely. I remember sort of the first time Dave came into a class to do a design thinking challenge. The students were quite puzzled as to what we were going to do, but we got them thinking differently. We got them, um, we got them collaborating, we got them sharing their ideas. And even in that very first lesson, when they said to me, there's no ways I'm going to stand up at the end and share my ideas, we had all the groups, we had all the students contributing. And I just think, it's not just the content, it's these soft skills that students need to learn and they need to practice and they need to get confident with, because this is going to be their future. Yeah, it's just really, really changed learning for me. It changed the classroom environment and it really got the students in my class so excited. They wanted to contribute. They started believing in themselves. And I always used to say to them, there's no right or wrong answer. As long as you can start backing up why you're thinking like that, it develops that reasoning and it gives them the confidence that they need.
Thanks for that. And that $0 startup activity that we did earlier, that was, go crazy, kind of get creative. And some of the ideas that were coming through, setting up a dance class for your friends, or, just thinking outside the box of what skills do I have? What's my passion? There was no right or wrong for the $0 startup, but that's an example of an activity, again, that can help support the development of that entrepreneurial mindset. And it's not just lesson starters. There are a range of types of activities and resources that you can use depending on your classroom needs.
Really loved using lesson starters at the end of lessons too. Students used to ask for them. They lower the barrier to participation and they get students thinking without that pressure. Honestly, if you ever felt like you're working harder than your students or wondering how to make entrepreneurship feel real, you are not alone. I've been there and I've seen how the right resources can completely change the learning experience for both teachers and students.
Thanks, Carlin. And hearing those stories of, what it actually was like in the classroom and seeing that shift is really great. And now, as we start looking at these different types of resources, as teachers, we know it's important to get the right resource to match your requirements for your students, depending on where you are in the curriculum and how familiar your students are with different concepts. So perhaps you are looking for an engaging activity that can help you reinforce or consolidate a difficult or some of those less than exciting concepts that you have been covering. So here is where a resource based on a single topic like supply and demand, break even, marketing promotion, or competitive pricing, how that can really help. Because these activities allow students to go on a deep dive into that single topic from the curriculum.
And this is where I get genuinely excited as a teacher. When resources are designed to help students really get that one core concept, it helps them learn in a way that feels purposeful. We know slides matter. It's what students are looking at and what you and your students can keep referring to. This sounds small, but it makes a huge difference. Visual, streamlined, and age-appropriate slides allow students to connect with what's on screen. It keeps their focus. And when you as a teacher can rely on slides to do a lot of that heavy lifting, you get to focus on facilitating the class and actually helping to lock the learning in. When slides are designed to help students feel like they are stepping into an experience, it really helps bring those concepts to life.
And when resources provide activities that are very hands-on for students, they're no longer just listening or filling in blanks. They're responding, like Dave talked about. They're making decisions, they're comparing options, they're justifying their choices, and they're actually applying that theory to scenarios that they recognize. And the example here that's shown is part of an activity focused on competitive pricing.
An activity like this is so great for getting students to apply the theory you're teaching to a relatable scenario. Let us know in the chat, does your school run a market day? If so, or even if you just want to use that as an example, this activity here gets students participating in a real world example related to a product they are interested in. They are working in the space of an entrepreneur, really developing that mindset.
And while relatable scenarios are incredibly powerful, we also know that there's something special about using real brands, real businesses, and real people that students already recognize. When students can see theory playing out in the world around them, it helps everything click a little faster and really just feel a lot more relevant.
So another type of resource you can use is a case study. These are brilliant for answering the questions students ask all the time. When would we actually use this? Case studies are effective at bringing concepts to life because they don't just tell students what a business does. They allow students to step into the situation and think through the decisions themselves. Case studies get students to actually analyze real decisions that businesses have made, consider trade-offs and constraints, and discuss what they would do and why. Getting students to step into that situation shifts them from being observers to being decision makers.
And it's helping, it's giving them that opportunity to build that entrepreneurial mindset in the classroom. And the example on screen here is part of a Lay's case study focused on value proposition. So a case like this, the activity like this is bringing entrepreneurship to life because it's getting students situated in the company and working through an activity where they're acting as though they work there. So I'm curious, what kind of case studies have you found work well for your students? Let us know in the chat. Are there particular brands or industries or stories that really grab the attention of your students? Okay, so far we've looked at resources and activities that help students understand concepts more deeply. But as we've talked about earlier, entrepreneurship isn't just about understanding concepts. It's about building the skills students need to work with others, generate ideas, and navigate uncertainty. And we know, even though this matters, it is often hardest to intentionally plan for.
Creativity, collaboration, and confidence don't always fit neatly into a lesson plan, even though they are some of the skills that our students need the most. So I want to ask you something, and there's no right or wrong answer here. In the chat, tell us one thing. What do you currently do to support creativity and collaboration in your classroom?
Arlen, always one for there's no right or wrong answer. We're just helping develop that entrepreneurial mindset. Again, these are great. And you can see how many different approaches are already happening in classrooms. And what we've found is that when creativity and collaboration are intentionally built into activities rather than added on at the end, that's when students really engage more deeply. This is something I've been passionate about since my teaching began, because getting students to work in teams just for the sake of teamwork is much different than designing projects or challenges that actually require teamwork. Design thinking and teamwork challenges are built specifically to support the development of those collaboration skills. And that's really helping to bring entrepreneurship to life. It's highlighting that entrepreneurial mindset and the development of it in the classroom.
One of the things I love, I think I said it earlier, but I'm going to say it again. But one of the things I love the most about these design thinking challenges is that they allow students to have fun, learn differently, and just go a little bit crazy in a safe way. It breaks up the routine and feels like something different. And that matters more than we realize sometimes. And the skills they're building don't come from talking about them. They come from practicing them. What surprised me as a teacher was how much I enjoyed these lessons too. The classroom energy shifts, and that really matters. Students aren't going to develop an entrepreneurial mindset if they don't enjoy the subject. You're not stepping away from learning, you're strengthening it in a way students actually want to be part of.
Well, then that classroom energy shifting as well. I think as teachers, we know when the classroom energy is, you're feeling like that struggle, it's hard for you as a teacher too. So getting that students to, shift their energy, and then they're starting to enjoy the subject, you as the teacher becomes, your energy shifts too. So it's just, it just keeps it's back to Dave's flywheel again. It just keeps going and going. So yeah, thanks for that. Okay, so a quick recap though. We've gone through a bit so far. So far, we've looked at lesson starters, and we actually did one, that $0 startup. Those again are great for setting the tone or introducing ideas. We saw how a topic-based activity can let students focus on practicing or applying a single concept from your curriculum. Then case studies help bring theory to life in a real-world context by getting students to step into the scenario. And design thinking and teamwork challenges give your students an opportunity to develop those core essential skills in a really fun way. So now we're going to look at project-based challenges as a final type of resource. And we know many of you run projects in your classes, especially for entrepreneurship. So actually let us know in the chat, what class projects have you used that have been really successful, and why do you think they worked so well? All right, I think it's important to pause here, because when we're teaching entrepreneurship, we can tend, as Dave said earlier, we can tend to, think about projects that are start a business. So the whole full start a business from scratch type project. And those can be powerful, but they also can be overwhelming, time intensive, and actually not always practical within real teaching constraints. So projects can be shorter and still really effective. Perhaps you could consider running project-based challenges that zoom in on specific parts of entrepreneurship rather than the whole journey at once. For example, you could run a challenge that focuses on the 4 Ps, or a challenge that covers solution ideation and costing to connect to financial reality, or a challenge that brings together a combination of empathy and new product development to understand value creation for customers. But the key here is using choice for you as a teacher. So what areas of entrepreneurship do you want to help your students focus on? How long do you have? And what parts of entrepreneurship do you want to bring to life at different points in your curriculum?
But sometimes teaching that big project is really great. I know when I taught my juniors and even my year 11s, running a full term project was a great way to help students see how all of the concepts tie together. Using bigger projects helps make the concepts more real for students, rather than just teaching them packaged into nice, neat little units. It shows them how they interact and work in the real world. Students are more engaged, and you can still hit all of your standards to know you've covered what you need to cover. And students are usually picking up the concepts with more ease because they can make the connections on their own and have heaps of fun. You can see them here on screen. Yes, it is a lot of information, but it shows how you can map out something like a 10-part project that could be used across several weeks or even a term or two, and make sure you're still covering all your curriculum topics. When you're running longer challenges, a good way to help students make these connections and consolidate their learning is to use additional dedicated supporting materials. Having presentation slides that mirror the prompts on student worksheets can help students see how the concepts build progressively and build their ideas step by step. It gives them an opportunity to revisit concepts so they can really reinforce the ideas as the project builds. Worked examples are also powerful. As a teacher, they give you confidence in the flow of the challenge, and they give your students a concrete reference if they get stuck.
So now that we have looked at different types of resources, when to use them, and how they can help bring entrepreneurship to life in the classroom and really help build that entrepreneurial mindset that we heard is so valuable from Dave earlier, what are your next steps? Earlier, you imagined a Friday afternoon where the class was struggling. Now imagine your classroom is bursting with creativity, collaboration, and entrepreneurial thinking. What does this look like for you, and how can you make it happen? Tell us in the chat what is one step you can take next week to bring entrepreneurship to life in your classroom. Okay, so today we explored strategies and resources that don't just teach entrepreneurship, they let students experience it. Now, if you're thinking, I love this, but I need support, that's where we can help you. We'll head into a Q&A now, but we do have all of the types of the resources we've talked about today ready to help teachers. And as you can see here, we've got a few different ways we can help you in your classroom. We've put these links in the chat too, so you can grab them. But I do want to just make a quick note there about one of the points, those upcoming competitions. These are free for teachers to use in their class. They give students a really fun way to bring concepts together while also competing for some great prizes. And the prizes also include some for the winning school and the winning teacher. So keep an eye out for those later in the year. We'll be running different editions for different countries and both junior and senior students. But now over to you. Any questions? And also, if you want, you can leave your email in the chat and we'll follow up with you later.